If you're looking for strategies to ensure critical thinking in discussion forums, you're in the right place because our guest today, Robert Piorkowski, will be providing you with some strategies to design and manage discussion forums in a way to let students have deep and salient interactions with each other. Robert, welcome.
Thank you, Firm Faith.
It is so good to have you with us to share some of your strategies. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what you do?
Sure. I come from the Capital District of New York State. I work for the SUNY System Administration. We serve 64 campuses, and my title is Assistant Director of Online Teaching. I've been an instructional designer for 20 years now, and I train faculty directly in how to build online courses. I led the initial team for developing the OSCQR Rubric, as well as the Instructional Designer Certificate Program, both of which have been adopted by the Online Learning Consortium.
And for those of us who are familiar with rubrics such as the Quality Matters, the OSCQR rubric is right up there. A lot of universities are adopting that rubric now. And we're just so pleased to have you to share some of your strategies with us. We know you have a wealth of experience, but today you're going to be sharing with us how to ensure critical thinking in discussion forums. So the strategies that you are going to be sharing with us today, tell us, what impressed you to start using these strategies and how have they worked for you?
So when we began training faculty in fully asynchronous online courses in 1999, we came up against several challenges, one of which was how to ensure authentic assessment, making sure that students were doing their own work and that faculty would be satisfied with the teaching and learning experience in a fully asynchronous online course. One tool that we had at our disposal was a discussion forum tool. And our faculty, along with us, we strategized how to get students to engage with each other to ensure that they would feel as if they were in a community of learners and that the assessment of their interactivity would be authentic. So we strategized several ways in which students could interact with each other and the instructor could be the guide on the side and monitor and evaluate their interactions. This proved very successful for our first round of faculty and all faculty thereafter, in that it really contributed to mitigating the distance between the students and the instructors. And instructors were very impressed with the level of engagement in the discussion forums, as long as they were designed appropriately. And in the first few rounds of training faculty, we developed a lot of best practices around designing and managing discussion forums.
Great. So let's talk about discussion forums. What are some strategies to do so, to design this discussion forums?
So it's really an art to design a good discussion forum, in that students first need to understand the importance of participating in discussions, because discussions in a face-to-face classroom are usually ancillary to the other work in a given course. So it took a little while to develop some introductory documents that stress the importance of engagement in discussions. And in addition, we needed to help faculty create rubrics that spell out the criteria for students to engage with each other. So discussions became elevated from simple casual back and forth between students to collegial collegial interaction between the students. And so we applied a level of rigor to posting discussions, to creating discussion posts that really resonated with faculty once we established some best practices. And so in many online courses throughout SUNY, faculty use the discussion forums in lieu of having students write papers. One thing that we discovered pretty quickly was that adult learners who had not been in college for several years were really adverse to writing 5-page and 10-page papers. However, consistent participation in discussion forums with a collegial level of rigor applied to those forums essentially panned out to be 5 10-page papers written 3 paragraphs at a time, as well as opportunities for the instructor to provide formative feedback to the students, which further enrich the experience.
So in these discussion forums, since they tend to favor that over the longer papers, do they have to like cite sources? What caliber of submissions do the students submit in the discussion forum?
So a typical rubric for a discussion forum in an open SUNY course would be criteria for the quality and the quantity of discussion posts in a given discussion forum. And some of that criteria would include citing sources, teaching the class something new, citing something from the reading assignments or information that is available elsewhere in the course, and as well as asking questions, asking more probing questions. We encourage our faculty to include that in the criteria for creating robust discussions.
So I imagine that the discussion prompt has to really explain to students. You have to really be careful about the discussion prompts, even with the rubric.
Indeed, the discussion prompts, a best practice that we discovered very early on was that the discussion prompt should be open-ended. That if you pose a question that has a single right answer, that would be more appropriate for an assignment. And so we conditioned a lot of faculty to think about open-ended questions that invite a variety of responses. In addition, we endorse a 2-part design. First would be that initial prompt, which is an open-ended question. Many times that prompt would link to or allude to an artifact. That could be a reading. In an art course, that could be a painting. And then the second part of the discussion would be how the instructor wants the students to engage with each other. So when we train faculty how to do this, we give them several examples of how to design student-to-student interaction in which they understand clearly what the expectations are for them to engage with each other.
And so just to dig deeper with students' engagement with each other, to what extent do you challenge students to challenge each other's assumption? Are they just saying, oh, that's a good point in terms of their response to each other? Do you give guidance in terms of the type of interaction, how they challenge each other's assumption and what they post?
Yes. What we try to do, again, we endorse quite a few different rubric criteria for student-to-student engagement. And one of those is to pose questions to each other. What we try to do is get faculty to understand that while discussion can demand a certain level of rigor, it also can be casual in nature. So what we propose to faculty is that they're very clear about what type of post earns credit. So there can be credit-bearing posts and there can be non-credit-bearing posts. So it's not as if you want to shut down the student to write something like, yes, I agree. However, you can sort of be clear about the student can say, yes, I agree, if he or she follows it up with a citation or with a direct reference to the chapter reading, let's say, then perhaps that post will earn credit.
So help us understand your typical timeline for discussions.
So in general, we have gathered data around the preferred length of a learning module. We call them learning modules. Other schools call them units. But essentially, the chunks into which an online course is broken, we say 7 plus or 2 minus modules work best for a 16-week online course. And what that breaks down to is about 10 to 14 days per module. So when a discussion unfolds over a 10 to 14 day period, what we tell faculty is that we want consistent participation in the discussion forums. We want to avoid students getting in at the last minute and just putting all their posts in. So what we have prescribed as a design is that within the first 3 days of the discussion forum opening, students must respond to the initial prompt. Within the first 6 days, they must provide a certain amount of posts, responses to each other, and from 6 days on to the end of the module, there is another amount of posts that they must provide in order to get credit for that discussion forum.
Okay. Would you say that there are a variety of discussion, different types? Like sometimes you may have a debate, but sometimes it might just be a prompt or reading to respond. Are there like different types of discussion, or do you tend to have similar types of structure for the discussion each time?
I'm glad you asked that, because discussion forums sort of suffer from the stigma of that word discussion. It has a social connotation which in a student's world never really counted for much in terms of credit toward a final grade. So what we try to, the term that we try to use is student-to-student interactions, and the discussion forum is just the tool. So to answer your question, a discussion forum can be used for a debate. A discussion forum can certainly be used for a group activity, such as looking at a case study. In art classes, a lot of students use the discussion forums, or I should say faculty design the discussion forums so that students can share work with each other and peer review work with each other. So the ability to post files, even links to video, create a lot of possibilities for student-to-student interaction. What I would like to drive home is that in online teaching, this ability to monitor and evaluate student-to-student interaction is unique to online courses. It would be very difficult to do it in a face-to-face, real-time course.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. So we spoke about the design of the discussion forum. Let's talk about managing the discussion forum. What are some strategies to do that?
So managing the discussion forums is very important in that students, again, with this uncertainty for some students around the importance of discussion, students need to see that that the instructor is monitoring those discussion forums closely. And so from the student perspective, those forums count more when they see that not only that they contribute to a grade, but that the instructor is checking in on them attentively. So what I recommend in terms of managing is certainly that discussion forums be graded shortly after they conclude. But in addition, what my personal style as an instructor is not to go into each forum and let's say contribute to the forum like the students. What I do is I take notes off of that forum, and in my announcements, I allude to the discussions. I try to get students into the discussions, but at the end of each discussion, I summarize some of the finer points of what happened in the discussion. So that tells the students that I was in there and I was very attentive to their posts. One thing I would recommend is that that in order to condition students to the mechanics of a discussion forum is at the very beginning of the course, create an icebreaker module. I'm sorry, an icebreaker discussion forum in which students get to introduce themselves. And there I have lots of back and forth with the students. And this contributes significantly to the social presence in a course, whereby students feel they gain a certain comfort level in their community of learners.
So what happens if, because I know you said earlier that you don't necessarily go into the discussion forum and participate per se, but what happens if you see that there's some misconception going on or it's perpetuated in the discussion forum? What do you do in those situations?
So what I do when students breach netiquette, or they or there's simply there's some kind of misperception going on, or I need to guide them. Sometimes I'll jump in and I'll guide them right in the discussion forum publicly, but more times than not, I will hide their post if they create something inappropriate. I'll hide their post and I will communicate with them privately. And the reason why I recommend staying out of the discussion forums, at least contributing to individual threads, is because if I, as the instructor, respond to only a few select students, I have gotten feedback around not providing response posts to other students. So again, as an instructor, I don't want to be perceived as favoring one student over another, and so again, my particular teaching style is to sort of let students interact with each other without my intervention publicly.
So do you explain to students the rationale for the strategy that you are doing? And is that a trend in the SUNY system?
I can't really speak for other instructors. It is sort of a vibrant conversation we have with experienced faculty as to what importance they lend to discussion forums in addition to their participation in discussion forums. A few consistencies across all instructors is that they read them very regularly. It's one of the first things that an instructor will do when going into an online course. And as part of managing an online course, attention to discussion forums is sort of like number 3 in the workflow, even before grading papers, because hopefully discussions stay vibrant and very current.
So going back to what you said earlier about not favoring students and having a strategy where you do not necessarily respond to a particular student per se, do you help students understand why you adopt that approach?
I don't know if I explain it, explicitly as you're asking, but the level of attention that I give my students is sort of self-explanatory. But also, my comments are fairly consistent throughout the course in that at very regular intervals, I reference the discussions, and again, I provide that summary at the end of the discussions. Sometimes, if it's a short summary, I'll post it as an announcement so that all students see very clearly that I'm paying careful attention.
Yeah, I understand. I remember when I was doing some research about online learning and even discussion forum, one faculty shared how he used to participate quite often in the discussion forum. He would post, he was very active. The students, though, they were not as active as he would have wanted. So one week he had to go to a conference. So he disappeared from the forum for a while. And suddenly the students started to participate. And so he realized that I think perhaps his absence for a little bit gave them some sense of ownership of the forum. So it wasn't just, him being the authority figure there. And, so they felt more comfortable participating when he was a little bit absent.
So I have heard that as well, that when an instructor enters the discussion forum, it could have the adverse effect of shutting down a lot of students that would have participated. They feel sometimes the instructor entrance into the discussion thread can sort of signal to the students that the final word has been spoken, so to speak. So yeah, it has had that effect. I've heard that several times.
Yeah. So when I was doing my dissertation and I asked students about their satisfaction in online learning and they were mentioned in the discussion forum, one student, I think, summarized what we are saying right now. The student said, be there, but not too much.
Right.
So I think it's a matter of us figuring out how to do that, how to make the students know that we are there, we are seeing their posts, and for some instructors, they use discretion in terms of when to enter or participate, but just not too much to the fact that it will discourage students from participating as they should. So, as the theme of our conversation is encouraging critical thinking in discussion forum, could you help us understand how these strategies that you have been describing really lend themselves to promoting critical thinking?
So the critical thinking piece, and I provided you with a few rubrics for critical thinking, or rubrics, a few that just include critical thinking as criteria.
Mm-hmm.
The critical thinking is ensuring critical thinking in a discussion forum is really bringing the design and the management together with the students. So let me explain. If the design of the initial question is open-ended
Mm-hmm.
and asks students to use one of those Bloom's taxonomy verbs of higher order thinking, such as apply, analyze, summarize, contrast. If that language is used in the initial prompt, that brings us a little closer to some critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the design of the discussion rubric.
Mm-hmm.
If the criteria in the rubric requires students to think critically, and it should, then they are not providing rote responses. You are usually asking them to combine several different skills and or information together to formulate their responses.
Mm-hmm.
Again, more critical thinking. The design of the discussion of the second part of the discussion can also ensure critical thinking in that credit will only be earned when a student asks a probing question that furthers the discussion, or a student challenges an assumption with let's say an alternate rationale. And so when we increase the level of rigor and require students not just to respond to each other, but to respond to each other in thoughtful ways, then we get closer to critical thinking. And thirdly is the feedback provided by the instructor. So is the instructor at regular intervals helping the students in a formative way, helping them think differently about a particular topic? Is the instructor guiding them to think harder and explain more? If those three things are in play, then I think we get very close to some authentic critical thinking going on in a course.
So what would be an example of the instructor guiding students to explain more, think more in the discussion forum?
So not only just grading, having that be a piece of criteria on a rubric, but asking a student for more detail, asking a student to provide corroboration in a chapter reading, sort of inspires synthesis, which we know is a higher order thinking skill. Asking the student to contrast one idea with another would also inspire a critical thinking skill.
Great.
Yeah, things like that.
Thank you. So how have students in general responded to your use of these strategies?
So students I have a little bit of, sort of perception on this. One generated as an instructor myself. I teach online French, and in my French courses, I have students debate cultural issues. So many times the feedback that I've gotten from students is that the discussions were their favorite part of the course. And that they learned more about their own culture, or just as much about their own culture as they did about French culture, which I am always very happy to hear. And that's me as an instructor. What I've heard from faculty is that that they're very satisfied with once they feel comfortable designing and managing online discussions, they're very satisfied with what they see from the students. They feel as if, first of all, that all students must participate, which is somewhat different than a face-to-face course. They get to hear from every student. In addition, they find that since online discussion forums are written, that they are more reflective and more productive, if you will, in creating a certain amount of knowledge in a discussion forum than a face-to-face discussion, because a face-to-face discussion in many cases is ephemeral. We don't get to just look at it, read it, evaluate it, etc. And instructors over and over very consistently say that they get to know their students really well in the discussion forums, that the narrative voice is very strong, and are very satisfied with how well they know their students as students, in contrast to the face-to-face experience, where only usually a certain percentage of students participate in class discussions.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing that. What would you say to our viewers who resonate with what you have shared today, but they are a little bit hesitant to start? What would be some first steps that they could take?
So what I would recommend is, again, starting off with an open-ended question, but ask yourself some questions. Ask yourself, how do professionals interact in the world of my discipline? And how do I prepare students for the professional world of a given discipline? And if we can dig into those questions and say that, well, biologists share their results with each other in a certain way, or that psychologists consider these questions and approach them in a particular way. They cite research. They challenge assumptions. If an instructor can envision, in the context of a course, how students will be expected to interact with coworkers in the future, then perhaps we get much closer to having an authentic assessment happening in a discussion forum. And students feel this as well, that there is a salience to me engaging in a task that is very closely related to what I will be doing after I finish my college degree.
I really like that. Thank you very much for sharing that, because sometimes we might keep the discussion just in the context of the classroom per se. Right. So a student might get an A in the classroom context of the discussion, but really thinking about the real world application, how will this discussion help them in the future? I really like that point. So you have shared some really practical strategies with us today. Could you, I know you mentioned a resource earlier, could you just repeat the resources that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Sure. I've shared on the resource page that Firm Faith provided for me. I've shared some links to some critical thinking rubrics, to lots of different rubrics that hopefully can be used to help instructors in the future, and anyone who checks it out, useful criteria for evaluating students in a discussion forum. Again, I'd like to drive home this sort of unique opportunity we have to evaluate and monitor student-to-student interaction. And so a lot of the resources that I've provided aim at that. And there's also a few in there about discussion forum design.
Yes.
That I took from directly from my instructional designer certificate program.
Yeah.
So they're just 2 discussion forums that I designed, and hopefully will inspire faculty and/or instructional designers to sort of pursue this effort to get students to interact with each other in a really meaningful way in a college course.
Yes, I'm glancing at the resources on your resource page, and there are several of them. So viewers, I would encourage you to check them out. I noticed, Rob, you didn't mention the OSCQR rubric because I think that's a general rubric for online. But I think just for people in general who are interested in online course design and so on, you probably could add that one as well, just for them to be familiar with the OSCQR rubric.
So yeah, the OSCQR rubric, the OSCQR is an acronym, and it stands for Open SUNY Course Quality Review. We created a rubric for course review.
Right.
That is built in the Google platform. It is completely editable and has lots of features that we hope, and it looks like has been generally accepted, as faculty friendly.
Yes.
And so it is not aimed to evaluate faculty. It is simply a lens for putting onto a course to identify areas for continuous improvement.
Excellent. I attended your workshop at the Online Learning Consortium conference last year in November, and that was an excellent workshop. And I see that many people, faculty developers, faculty were interested in really finding out how to use and adapt that rubric. That's one of the things I like about it. It's one can adapt it, and you provide that resource for free. So thank you very much for your service to the field. I know that this rubric is not the topic of our conversation today, but I think it really has an impact in the field of online learning.
I'm glad you like it, from Faith.
Yeah. So thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today.
And thank you.
And viewers, I encourage you again to check out the resources that Rob has shared with us, and I will be checking them out myself, and share this conversation with others. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of this virtual summit. See you soon.